let's go ahead and get started with example 4. So we're looking at this picture here. It says given angle 1 and angle 2 are complementary, we want to prove that angle 3 and angle 4 are complementary. Okay, so we see that these two are complementary, which means they add up to 90 degrees. We want to prove that these two are complementary as well. So this one's going to be kind of fun. We're just going to go through the 2-column proof, and then the paragraph proof is actually written here. So we're really just appreciating and understanding. Now for this, what you're going to have to do is you're going to be given a 2-column proof, and then what you're going to have to produce is a paragraph proof. But let's just go ahead and understand what's going on for this, because this is a different type of technique that they're going to use. So we start with the given information. Angle 1 and angle 2 are complementary, right? So that's given. Now, whenever we have something like that, we can change that into an equation. Measure of angle 1 plus measure of angle 2 is equal to 90 degrees by the definition of complementary angles. Okay, so those two things kind of go together, which is great. Okay, so now we know that these two angles equal 90 degrees. Now, what you should see, what you should look at is when we have a whole bunch of lines going like this, you should think about the vertical angles theorem, right? Because all vertical angles are congruent. So what I want you to see, what's the easiest way is you need 2 lines. Now there's a lot of lines going on here. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, well 3. There's 3 of them. So sometimes what I like to do is when there's a lot of lines, I just want to highlight 2 of them. So I'm going to highlight this line and this line right here. And if you can see, these 2 angles are directly across from each other. And so they are vertical, they are congruent. If you look over here at these other 2 lines, there's an angle here, which is also another angle, and then there's another angle in that. So we can't use these 2 yellow lines. When we look at these 2 yellow lines, the only thing that we can say is that angle 1 and angle 3 are congruent. And that's what they state right here. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. Okay? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a different set of lines. Now I'm going to look at this line again, but I'm also going to look at this line here. So now these green lines, those are the ones I'm looking at. And if you can look at, see this angle here and this angle here are directly across from each other. So they are also congruent. Okay, angle 2 and angle 4 are congruent. So both of those sets of angles are congruent by the vertical angles theorem. Okay, then from there we can change the format, right? So instead of saying angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, we can say the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 3. And we can say that instead of angle 2 and angle 4, we can say the measure of angle 2 is equal to the measure of angle 4. So remember what we want to do. We want to say that angle 3 and angle 4 are complementary, right? Oh, and we can change this format just by the definition of congruent angles. All right, perfect. So here we have it right here, right? We have that piece of information, and we have this piece of information. Okay, and this is the previous formula that we came up with from the given information. So look, it's kind of tricky what they do. So what do we see? We see measure of angle 1. Well, is there another way of saying the measure of angle 1? Yeah, we can say that as the measure of angle 3. So instead of saying the measure of angle 1, what they say is they substitute the measure of angle 3 in for the measure of angle 1 here. Okay. And then we have the measure of angle 2. Is there a different way of stating the measure of angle 2? Yes, and the measure of angle 2 is equal to the measure of angle 4. So instead of writing the measure of angle 2, what can we write? Well, we can write the measure of angle 4. And then we just write that same 90, right? So we substituted twice, and what do we end up with? We end up with the measure of angle 3 plus The measure of angle 4 is equal to 90 by substitution. Oh my goodness, how close are we? We need angle 3 and angle 4 complementary. Right now, because of substitution, we are stating that those two angles add up to 90. So the next thing we can say is just angle 3 and angle 4 are complementary because of the definition of complementary angles. So like I said, this is kind of a tricky way, using substitution twice to get what you want, right? So it's just kind of looking at these strategies and kind of memorizing the tools and the things that they use to get from point A to point B. So what we have to do is we just have to take all this information here and write it into a paragraph proof. So how that's done is it just says angle 1 and angle 2 are complementary, right? It would probably say it is given. It probably would have been good to say it is given that angle 1 and angle 2 are complementary. So the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 90 degrees by the definition of complementary angles. Okay, then we go to the next part. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 3 and angle 2 is congruent to angle 4 by the vertical angles theorem. So the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 3 and the measure of angle 2 equals the measure of angle 4 by the definition of congruent angles, right? Then by substitution, measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 4 equals 90. So angle 3 and angle 4 are complementary by the definition of complementary angles. So there you go. That's how you go from a 2-column proof to a paragraph proof. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the next example here. So this is kind of a fun picture. What does it say? It says, we have this picture here. It's given. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 4. What we need to prove is that angle 2 and angle 3 are congruent. Well, if we know that these two are congruent, how do you think they're going to do that without looking? Well, if you said they're going to use vertical angles here, that's what you should always see. When you see this, you should just think vertical angles. When you see this, you should just think vertical angles. So if they think that 1 is congruent to 2, those are the same, and we know that 3 is congruent to 4, right? Because 1 and 4 are congruent, then we should know that 2 and 3 are congruent because of the vertical angles. So let's go ahead and see how they did it. So we started with the given information. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 4, right? That's given. And then we have angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, right? And angle 3 is congruent to angle 4 by the vertical angles theorem. Now let's see what they did. They said that angle 2 is congruent to angle 4 by the transitive property of congruence. Do you remember the transitive property of congruence? It was something like if angle A is congruent to angle B and angle B is congruent to angle C, because these are congruent to the same angle, then therefore angle A is congruent to angle C by the transitive property of congruence, okay? So let's see how that's working here. So we have angle 1 and angle 4. We have angle 1 and angle 2, angle 3 and angle 4, and we're getting to here angle 2 and angle 4, okay? So what are the pieces of information that are being used? Well, if you look here, we're going from angle 1 to angle 4, and angle 1 to angle 2, so to me, it looks like both of these are congruent to angle 1, right? So since they're both congruent to the same angle, therefore, they are congruent to each other by the transitive property of congruence, right? They're both congruent to angle 1, therefore they're both congruent to each other. Now, what do we need to prove? We need to prove that angle 2 is congruent to angle 3. So we have angle 2 is congruent to angle 4, but we don't have angle 2 is congruent to angle 3, so we need to go a little bit further. So then what do? Well, we can look at these two pieces of information, right? So if you look at these two, I'm going to highlight them in green. Angle 3 is congruent to angle 4, right? And then we have what we just came up with. Angle 2 is congruent to angle 4. Well, it looks like both of these are congruent to angle 4, right? So by the transitive property of congruent, since these angles are both congruent to the same angle, we can say that angle 2 is congruent to angle 3 by the transitive property of congruence, and it's saying there by steps 2 and 3. And so that's how we got to right there. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. Now we just need to write all this down in a paragraph proof. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing we're going to say is, it is given that angle 1 is congruent to angle 4. All right. Then we can say, by the vertical angles theorem, and then we can just put all of this. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, and angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. Then angle 2, we can just say this, is congruent to angle 4 by the transitive property of congruence, and I'm just going to say angle 2 is congruent to angle 3 by the transitive property of congruence. And there you go. That is our paragraph proof. All right, that's it for 2-7. Make sure you remember that you can re-watch these videos if you feel like you just need a little bit more time for that information to simmer and for it to soak in, and know that that's totally okay and available to you. So I hope you have a wonderful time on your homework. Make sure any questions, you bring them to our next class session or go and get help in math support. All right, see you later. Bye.